March 14th, 1986, Singapore. It's just another Friday night at Neptune nightclub, one of the most popular night spots on Serangoon Road. The music is loud, the lights are flashing, the room is full. Just another busy night, until a sharp cracking sound cuts through the noise. At first, people thought it was part of the music, but then staff noticed it. A large crack has appeared in one of the pillars, and inside the changing rooms, they found more cracks along the walls. Something was wrong. The staff immediately reported it to the owner, a man named Kong Lim. His response was two words: just support it. So they did. Wooden planks, leaning against a cracked structural column, holding up floors above it. The music comes back on. The crowd keeps dancing. The night continues. That night, the building gives its final warning, a very clear one, but it's ignored, because stopping the business means losing money. And by the next morning, that decision would lead to Singapore's deadliest civil disaster in modern history. 33 people would lose their lives, and many would be trapped beneath the rubble for days. This is the story of Singapore's deadliest civil disaster. The next morning, March 15th, 1986, inside Neptune nightclub. The crowds are gone. Only staff remain, quietly cleaning up the mess from the night before. Above them, inside Hotel New World, guests are packing their bags. Some are still asleep. Below on the ground floor, customers stand in line at the bank. Everything feels normal. And outside, along Serangoon Road, life moves as usual for a Saturday morning. Traffic flows steadily. Shops are open. It's a building full of life, stacked layer by layer, until 11:25 a.m. A low rumble, barely noticeable at first. Then suddenly, a violent cracking sound. In a matter of seconds, the structure gave way. The entire building collapsed straight down. People ran. A massive cloud of dust exploded into the street, swallowing everything in sight. Cars were crushed instantly. Debris shot across the road, and then it was over. Where a six-story building once stood, there was now a pile of rubble, barely 1 story high. Inside that rubble, dozens of people were trapped. Some were buried deep beneath layers of collapsed concrete. Others were pinned between slabs of flooring, trapped in tiny pockets of space, in complete darkness, with limited air, and no idea if anyone could reach them. Within minutes, emergency services began to arrive. Police, firefighters, ambulances. But as they looked at the scene, one thing became clear. This was not a normal rescue. This was something Singapore had never faced before. Each floor is crushing the one below, leaving behind narrow, unstable gaps where survivors might still be alive. But every movement, every shift in the debris risked triggering another collapse. Rescuers faced an impossible choice. Move too fast, and they could crush the very people they were trying to save. Or move too slowly, and survivors could suffocate beneath the rubble. Time was no longer measured in hours, but in breaths. And somewhere beneath the debris, some people were still alive. What followed was one of the most intense rescue operations Singapore had ever seen. Within minutes of the collapse, police, firefighters, and soldiers rushed to the scene. But this wasn't a normal rescue. This was a race against time under thousands of tons of concrete. For the first time in Singapore's history, rescuers deployed a technique rarely used in the region called acoustic life detection. Sensitive microphones were lowered deep into the rubble, listening for anything: a tap, a voice, a faint sign of life, and sometimes they heard it. Rescuers began cutting into the debris, using torches, drills, and hydraulic equipment to carve narrow tunnels through the collapsed structure. But every movement was dangerous. One wrong cut could trigger another collapse, so they moved slowly, hour by hour, day into night, night into another day. And for 85 hours, the operation continued without stopping. Families gathered at the site, waiting, hoping, and listening for names. And then, a breakthrough. A survivor was pulled out alive. Then another, then another. Each rescue met with cheers and relief. Some had survived in tiny air pockets. Others were trapped under desks or furniture that had shielded them from the crushing weight. In total, 17 people were pulled from this nightmare alive, but 33 others never made it out. And among those lost in the rubble was the man at the very center of the tragedy, Kong Lim, the owner, the man who commissioned every corner of it, the man who, just the night before, had been warned his building was cracking and told his staff to prop it up with wooden planks. He died inside the building he had created. To understand why the building collapsed, we have to go back 15 years before that morning. The building was completed in 1971 by a local businessman named Kong Lim. Officially, it was known as the Lian Yak Building, named after his real estate company. He wasn't a major developer. He wasn't backed by a large corporation. He was a small private owner, trying to maximize value from a single piece of land. And from the very beginning, this building was designed with one goal in mind: greed and profit. Every floor was planned to generate income. The structure rose 6 stories high. On the top 4 floors, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th levels, sat a budget hotel known as Hotel New World. Dozens of small rooms, tightly packed together. Guests were constantly checking in and out. Below that, on the 2nd floor, the Neptune nightclub. On the ground floor, a bank, along with several small commercial units and shops. Beneath the building, in the basement, was a car park. And above it all, on the flat roof, sat heavy equipment, including a water tank, 2 storage water heaters, a cooling tower, and 4 air conditioning condensing units. From top to bottom, every level was occupied. Every space was used. Every floor carried weight, all generating income. And for years, it worked. The building stood. Money kept coming in. When the collapse finally happened and the dust settled, Singapore was left with a single haunting question: how? Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not in a city defined by order and safety. The investigation began immediately. Engineers and inspectors combed through the debris, piece by piece. What they found was not a mystery, not an act of God. It was a mistake, a fatal human error. The responsibility traced directly back to the design and to the decisions made by Kong Lim. To save money, he hired an unqualified draftsman named Shum Chung Heng to handle the structural calculations. He wasn't a professional engineer. He was a technician, but Lim didn't care. He needed a building on a budget, and in that decision, a catastrophic error was made. The calculations only accounted for the dead load, the weight of the building itself, but completely ignored the live load, the people, the furniture, the equipment, the daily operations. In other words, the building was designed to carry far less weight than it actually would, and yet it was approved. Year after year, the load increased. More furniture, more equipment, more people were moving through the building every day. Slowly, columns began to weaken. Concrete started to crack. The structure was failing until that fateful morning when it could no longer hold. And the man who was supposed to face charges was already gone, buried in the same rubble as the people he had failed, without ever facing criminal prosecution. There were no dramatic criminal convictions. There was no one left to put on trial, but the consequences for Singapore were still severe. Soon after, authorities launched nationwide inspections of every older building. Structural safety regulations were overhauled. Independent checks became mandatory, and engineering standards were tightened to the highest levels. Today, if you walk past the corner of Serangoon Road and Owen Road, you wouldn't see anything unusual. The scars are gone. In place of the ruins stands a new hotel, modern, reinforced, built under strict and uncompromising safety codes born from the 1986 tragedy. To most people, it's just another building in Singapore. But for those who lived through it, for the survivors who were pulled from the rubble, if they ever pass that same corner, they don't see what stands there today. They remember what was lost. Because for them, the collapse of the Hotel New World is not history. It's a reminder of how quickly normal life can disappear.